My work took me to various parts of the country, and I'd come to think of hotel rooms as my second home. Although familiar with the transient nature of these spaces, I always looked for something unique in each hotel, something to remember it by. But my latest trip to an old metropolitan hotel was an experience I never anticipated and would give anything to forget. After a grueling 8-hour flight, I was mentally exhausted. I hoped for a smooth check-in and a comfortable bed to crash into. As I approached the front desk, the lobby's ornate decorations caught my attention. The marble flooring, the crystal chandelier, and the mahogany counters looked like they belonged to a bygone era. It felt more like a museum than a hotel. The receptionist, a middle-aged lady with a warm smile, handed me my key card. "Room 1313, she announced, "on the 13th floor. "That's unusual," I mumbled, recalling the superstition about hotels usually avoiding a 13th floor. She chuckled. "Oh, this building has its fair share of quirks." The elevator was old, with creaky doors and analog buttons. The numbers went up to 13. My intrigue deepened as the elevator began its ascent. When the doors slid open, I was met with a dimly lit corridor, its walls adorned with faded wallpaper and vintage sconces. A chill ran down my spine. The other floors were modern, but this one was stuck in time. I shook off the unease and made my way to room 1313. The room was spacious and similarly draped in history, antique furniture, heavy drapes, and an ornate mirror with intricate carvings. I unpacked, glancing around the room, trying to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Night fell, and just as I was about to tuck myself in, the TV sprang to life on its own. A black and white film started playing, showing the grand opening of what looked like this very hotel. Elegantly dressed men and women danced and laughed, but their eyes were hollow, void of any emotion. A soft, eerie melody played in the background, and it sent shivers down my spine. Startled, I reached for the remote, but it was nowhere to be found. The phone began to ring, its shrill tone echoing in the silence. I picked it up hesitantly. A raspy, ancient voice greeted me. "Welcome to the forgotten floor." I hung up, panic slowly creeping in. As I tried to gather my thoughts, my attention was drawn to the bed. There, lying neatly folded, was an old-fashioned nightgown that wasn't there before. It was accompanied by a note. "Wear me." My instincts screamed at me to leave. I dashed for the door, but it wouldn't budge. Desperate, I raced to the elevator, but the button to the ground floor wasn't working. I felt trapped. In my panic, I remembered the emergency stairs. Taking 2 steps at a time, I descended rapidly. But after what felt like hours, I still found myself on the 13th floor. Determined, I tried again, and this time, miraculously, I reached the lobby. Gasping for breath, I approached the front desk, demanding an explanation. The receptionist looked at me, puzzled. "Sir, this hotel doesn't have a 13th floor. Are you feeling all right?" Confused, I held up the key card she'd given me earlier. "Room 1313. Her eyes widened and she whispered, "That room hasn't existed for decades." She quickly arranged for another room and assured me it was just a mix-up. But as I lay in bed that night, the soft, eerie melody from the TV played in my mind. The next morning, I checked out, vowing never to return. And while the experience remains a mystery, one thing's for certain. Some floors, like some pasts, are best left forgotten. It was my first time traveling alone for a business conference, and I found myself lodged in a nondescript motel at the outskirts of a small town. The place seemed peaceful enough. The rooms were decent and the staff were courteous. The only peculiar thing was a small warning sign at the reception. "Please do not answer any knocks between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. Initially, I dismissed it, attributing it to perhaps a local prankster or a quirk of the hotel's management. I settled into my room, which was on the ground floor and offered a picturesque view of a dense forest that bordered the motel. The first part of my night was uneventful. I ordered room service, caught up on some emails, and watched a movie. Drained from my journey, I decided to call it an early night, ensuring the windows and doors were securely locked. Around 2:15 a.m., I was roused from my deep slumber by a soft knock at the door. Groggily, I remembered the sign at reception and chose to ignore it. The knocking persisted, gradually increasing in intensity and urgency. Each knock echoed ominously in the silent room. Intrigued, I tiptoed to the door, peeking through the peephole. The outside was bathed in an eerie moonlight, but no one was in sight. Feeling bolder, I opened the door a crack, but was met with only the chilly night air and the distant rustling of trees. I was about to dismiss it as a figment of my tired imagination, when I heard a soft, melancholic voice from the direction of the forest. "Why didn't you let me in?" it whispered. Chilled to the bone, I quickly slammed the door shut, double-locking it. My heart raced as I tried to process what just happened. The voice had sounded both mournful and menacing, and it definitely wasn't human. I crawled back into bed, pulling the covers tight, trying to convince myself it was a dream. Just when I started to calm down, my room phone rang, its shrill tone shattering the silence. Hesitantly, I picked it up. It was the front desk. "Sir, we noticed you opened your door. We'd advised against it," the receptionist said in a shaky voice. "Stay in your room, and whatever you do, don't answer the knocking." Confused and terrified, I asked her to explain. She hesitated before whispering, "The forest is home to spirits. One in particular tries to find its way into our world between 2 and 3 a.m. It knocks." Suddenly, the knocking resumed, this time on the window. I dared not look, fearing what I might see. The voice, louder now, echoed from outside. "Let me in." Hours seemed to drag on, but eventually the knocking ceased and dawn began to break. Exhausted and traumatized, I packed my bags, determined to leave. As I checked out, the receptionist approached me. "I'm sorry about last night," she said softly. "That spirit, it's said to be a lost soul from decades ago. She used to live in this town and vanished in those woods. She knocks on doors, searching for a way back. Few have seen her and remained sane." She handed me a small amulet. "For protection," she whispered. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. At the edge of the forest stood a pale, forlorn figure watching me. Our eyes met for a split second before she vanished. The conference, my original purpose for the trip, became an afterthought. The haunting experience at the motel overshadowed everything. Though I've stayed at many places since then, I always ensure my room doesn't face a forest, and I never ever answer knocks in the middle of the night. As a travel blogger, I'd made it my mission to visit offbeat locations. When I stumbled upon the Maison du Temps, a quaint hotel nestled in a quiet European town, I couldn't resist. It was the perfect mix of history and mystery. I arrived at dusk, the fading sunlight casting a golden hue over the old stone building. A grand chandelier in the lobby lit the intricate woodwork, and vintage portraits adorned the walls. It felt like stepping into another era. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with sharp features, handed me the key to my room, 312. She then added, almost as an afterthought, "Oh, and please avoid room 313. It's not ready for guests." Her tone was peculiar, but the fatigue from my journey meant I didn't probe further. As I headed to my room, I noticed that room 313 was directly opposite mine. The door was older than the others, its paint chipped, and it had no electronic keycard slot, just a rusty old keyhole. That night, as I settled into bed, I heard soft music playing. It sounded like an old gramophone, the tunes melancholic yet beautiful. Curiously, it seemed to emanate from room 313. I recalled the receptionist's warning and tried to brush it off, but the allure was too strong. I tiptoed to the door of 313 and put my ear against it. The music was clearer, accompanied by what sounded like soft sobbing. I knocked gently, but the sound ceased abruptly. The silence that followed was palpable. Unable to quell my curiosity, I tried the door handle. To my surprise, it turned, and the door creaked open slightly. The room was bathed in a soft glow, the source being a vintage gramophone on a table. But that wasn't what caught my attention. In the center of the room was a woman in a white gown, dancing. Her movements were delicate, ethereal, her face hidden behind a cascade of golden locks. Transfixed, I took a step into the room. The floorboards groaned beneath me, and the woman stopped dancing. Slowly, she turned to face me, and my heart nearly stopped. Her eyes were hollow, an endless void, and her lips stretched into a mournful smile. "You've seen me," she whispered, her voice echoing with sorrow. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back, slamming the door shut. My breathing was ragged, my mind struggling to comprehend what I'd just witnessed. The next morning, I approached the receptionist, demanding an explanation. She sighed, motioning for me to sit. "That room," she began hesitantly, "has a history. A century ago, a young dancer named Isabel stayed there. She was set to perform in the town, a dance of her own creation, but on the night before her performance, she vanished, never to be seen again. People say her spirit still lingers, forever dancing the dance she never got to perform." I checked out immediately, my skin still crawling from the previous night's encounter. As I left, I took one last look at the hotel. Through the window of room 313, I saw Isabel watching me, her hollow eyes filled with a silent plea. Months later, as I recounted my experience on my blog, the story became one of my most read posts. Readers were both fascinated and horrified. Some even visited the Maison du Temps, hoping for a glimpse of Isabelle, but none ever saw her. I often wonder if I had imagined it all, but every time I close my eyes, I see her, the dancer of room 313, forever trapped in her final performance. The antique keys to room 419 felt cold and heavy in my hand. I had always been a sucker for historical hotels, and the Baron's Rest was no exception. The hotel was a grand piece of architecture, nestled in the heart of New Orleans. It had seen wars, hurricanes, and decades of history. I had come to the city on a business trip and was only going to be in town for a couple of nights. The thought of staying in a generic chain hotel didn't appeal to me, so I opted for the Baron's Rest with its ornate decor and stories of hauntings, which I admit intrigued me. The room was spacious, adorned with period-appropriate furniture, heavy drapes, and a canopy bed. I admired the attention to detail. A large gilded mirror hung on one wall, its glass slightly tarnished with age. My first night passed peacefully, with the sounds of the vibrant city acting as my lullaby. However, it was on the second night that things took a peculiar turn. I returned to my room after a long day of meetings exhausted. As I was getting ready for bed, I felt a sudden drop in temperature. The air felt icy and my breath came out in visible puffs. Startled, I looked around the room for an open window but found none. Turning towards the mirror to adjust my shirt, I froze. Behind me, reflected in the tarnished glass, was an elderly man in a tattered suit, just standing and observing. Yet when I spun around, the room was empty. Thinking I was just overtired, I tried to brush it off and climbed into bed. The cold, however, was persistent. I bundled up in the blankets, attempting to find warmth. Just as sleep began to claim me, I felt a weight at the foot of my bed as if someone had sat down. My heart raced, but I mustered the courage to look. The dim light from the street lamps outside illuminated the figure of the elderly man, now sitting, his gaze fixed on me. Paralyzed with fear, I could only watch as he slowly began to move closer, his eyes never leaving mine. Mustering every ounce of courage, I bolted from the bed, rushing to the door and flung it open, dashing down the hallway. The night concierge, startled by my frantic appearance, immediately came to my aid. Catching my breath, I recounted my experience. The concierge's face paled as he listened. "Sir," he began, "room 419 was once occupied by Bartholomew Roux, a wealthy businessman from the 1800s. He was known to spend evenings watching the city from his room. One evening he simply vanished, never to be seen again. Some say his spirit remains, forever observing. Unable to sleep, I spent the night in the lobby, waiting for dawn. As soon as daylight broke, I checked out, eager to put as much distance between myself and room 419. Years later, I still can't shake off that chilling encounter. Despite my efforts to debunk the experience, rationalizing it as mere fatigue, the haunting memory of those penetrating eyes, forever watching, still lingers. I now have one rule when I travel: always avoid historical hotels. Some pasts are best left undisturbed. It was a cross-country work trip that brought me to the grandiose but slightly run-down Everwood Manor, in a secluded part of Vermont. With the conference taking place nearby, I was left with little choice in terms of accommodation. Most participants opted for the newer hotels in the neighboring town, but something about the Everwood's vintage charm appealed to me. The idea of a large old hotel all to myself was just too tempting. Little did I know, I wouldn't be as alone as I thought. Checking in, the innkeeper, an older woman named Clara, handed me a brass key for room 505. "It's one of our best suites," she said with a smile, her eyes briefly flickering with an unreadable emotion. The room was beautiful, with a canopy bed, intricate wallpaper, and a stunning view of the surrounding forest. I settled in, relishing the peace and quiet after a long day. That night, as I drifted into a deep sleep, I was abruptly awakened by a soft melody coming from somewhere within the room. Groggily, I looked around, trying to locate the source. It sounded like a music box. After a few minutes, the tune ceased, and I wrote it off as a dream, drifting back to sleep. The following day was eventful, with back-to-back meetings and workshops. By evening, I was exhausted and looking forward to another peaceful night. But as I was preparing for bed, the music started again. This time, I was wide awake and sure it wasn't my imagination. I scoured the room, looking for a hidden speaker or some source, but found nothing. Feeling uneasy, I decided to sleep with the bedside lamp on. Around midnight, a cold draft swept through the room. I drew the blankets tighter around me, and then I heard it. Soft, almost inaudible weeping. My heart raced, and I strained my ears, trying to confirm that I wasn't hearing things. The sobbing was unmistakable and seemed to be coming from the ensuite bathroom. mustered up the courage to investigate. The bathroom was freezing, and the mirror was fogged up as if someone had just taken a hot shower. Written on it in a childlike handwriting were the words, "Won't you play with me?" Chills ran down my spine. The idea of spending another minute in that room was unbearable. I packed my things hurriedly and went down to the lobby, where Clara was behind the counter organizing some papers. Upon seeing my terrified expression, she sighed, "Room 505, isn't it?" I nodded, explaining my experience. Clara looked down remorsefully. Over a century ago, this hotel was a lavish residence. The owner's young daughter, Amelia, used to stay in what is now room 505. She was a lonely child, with her music box her only solace. One fateful evening, while playing, she slipped into the bathtub, hitting her head and tragically drowned. Clara continued, "Guests who stay in that room often report hearing her music box or her cries. She's searching for someone to play with, someone to ease her eternal loneliness." Feeling a mix of pity and terror, I checked out immediately. As I left, I could almost hear the faint tinkle of the music box and the sorrowful weeping of a lonely, lost soul. Years have passed, but the haunting memory of that night stays vivid in my mind. I've shared my story with many, and while some are skeptical, others share similar experiences. One thing is for sure, whenever I travel now, I always research the history of my accommodation. Some places, no matter how charming, have tales that are too tragic and guests who never truly leave. In the shadows of the night, if our tales from unsettling horror stories gave you a fright, press like and let it be known. Subscribe, so you're never alone in this haunting journey, and share, so others too can be wary. Until our next sinister tale, stay dark, dear listener.